And he was arguing against the view that art cannot be defined. It's important to realise there was this big movement saying that art can't be defined, and George Dickens says, yes it can, it's easy to define it. A work of art is an artefact, that's something that's been made by human beings, let's say. He may not restrict it to that. Some aspects of which have had the status of candidates for appreciation conferred upon them by a member or member of the art world. Basically, if I'm a member of the art world and say, look at this, think about this as if it were a work of art, according to Dickey, I turn it into a work of art. That becomes a work of art. And that sounds absurd to many people, but it explains how this crumpled ball of paper in the last few minutes went from being just a ball of paper to being a ball of art, and a work of art. And when you make something into a work of art, you invite a different kind of scrutiny of it. This theory was interesting as well because asking the question, what is art, led to George Dickey coming up with this theory. And he did something that almost no theorist of art had ever done before, which is he separated out the question, what is art, from the question, what is good art, or what is worthwhile art, or even what is bad art. So for him, to call something a work of art is simply to put it into a particular kind of category. For many people, to call something a work of art is highly evaluative. It's to say that it's something that merits our attention, that's something worth looking at, something that's of value to us. So Dickey put it this way, he said that you can make a work of art out of almost anything. You could make a work out of a sow's ear, but it doesn't turn it into a silken purse. By which he meant that the very act of creating a work of art is separate from the question of creating something of value. Some works of art have great value in our culture and some don't, but that's a different question. Whereas traditional theorists of art are always trying to explain what is art, because they're interested in the question, what is a good work of art? And that's quite interesting, so we could then get to the position where we could imagine that the newspaper reaction to when Martin Creed sells this to the Museum of Modern Art is, how absurd. That's not even art, that's just a ball of paper. So Dickey can say, well, you're wrong, it isn't just a ball of paper, it is a work of art. But there's still a question whether it's worth anything at all, because it could be a really terrible work of art. Whereas for somebody like Clive Bell or Robin Collingwood, to call something a work of art is to give it high praise. It's to say it's something that you really should pay attention to in life. So a candidate for appreciation just means you might want to have a look at this and think about it in a certain sort of way. It doesn't mean that because it's a candidate, it has actually succeeded in embodying important thoughts about the world or anything like that. Okay, so I've gone quite a long time just on the first of the 5 points that I want to make. The others are not as long-winded, I warn you. But I do see a typo coming up. So see if you spot it. Okay, the second important reason why we might ask ourselves about what art is because we want to understand the human condition. That's what philosophers often try and do, I think. Works of art are genuinely among the greatest things that human beings have produced. If you wanted, look, there are various spaceships going out to Mars and places like this at the moment, unmanned or unwomaned, and sending back information with the hope of discovering life. I'm told on good authority that if life is discovered on Mars or anywhere nearby, it's going to be something a bit like a bacterium. It's not going to be a little talking ET or anything like that. It's going to be some microscopic, unintelligent organism. But if you were to find an intelligent Martian or an intelligent alien, and you wanted to tell them, what have human beings done? What is it, a value that you've done? Obviously we have science, we're very proud of, but art is, and the visual arts are some of the greatest things that human beings have produced are works of visual art. And I don't think that's particularly controversial. Works of music as well. If you want to, you might pick out Leonardo, Bach, and Shakespeare as great artists whose works you would want to communicate to an alien trying to understand what it is that we are and what we do and value. Look, philosophy for me is a project of inquiry. Philosophy is not a body of knowledge that you simply plug into. Philosophy is an activity. It's a way of finding out more about the world and about our place in the world. It's got its particular methods in terms of argument and reason and logic and speculation and occasionally bullshit, but and poetry. But fundamentally, it's a project for finding out about the world and finding out about our place in the world and what matters to us. I mean, ethical questions about what matters to us are coming up too. But so it seems to me that it's worth asking the question as a philosopher, what is art? Because art is so central to so many human beings, and it embodies some of the greatest things that human beings have ever done. And how weird it would be not to ask questions about what it is, particularly as it's slightly puzzling. So I think that understanding what art is and attempting to understand what art is obviously a worthwhile project, something that we should do because we want to understand what we are and our place in the universe, our place on Earth, in our local city, in our household. All those things are important to us. We want to understand at different levels what we are and how we live. And art is pretty central to the things that many people value about what human beings have done. So that's an easy one. One that doesn't come up very often is, I think, understanding what art is could be part of the Socratic move of knowing yourself in order to answer the question, how should I live? That is the really basic ethical question. The question in ethics, what should I do? How should I live my life? That's the basic question we all have to ask, and if we don't ask it, we still live a life that somehow reveals some of what we think about that, if we're not hypocrites. So, if we don't have any idea about what art is, how can we judge whether it's worth devoting time to it? That's one view. You could respond as a Wittgensteinian might, somebody who follows Ludwig Wittgenstein, and say, well, actually, there are many things in life that we can't define, we can't say what they are, but we can still operate perfectly happily with the concepts. So he had this notion of a family resemblance term. So families, members of a family related by blood look a bit like each other on the whole. They don't all share all the same features. They might have similar eye shape, but not the same nose. Two of them have got the same colour hair, another one's got different coloured hair, one got long legs, one's got short legs. But you can see, when you see them in a room, you can identify that these people are related. And so Wittgenstein had this thought that many of our concepts are family resemblance terms. Like, he used the example of a game. What is a game, he asks. And people try and define game. And when they try and define what a game is, they attempt to give necessary and sufficient conditions for something being a game. A necessary condition is a prerequisite, something that has to be there for it to be a game, and a sufficient condition is something that would guarantee it being a game. If it has that quality, it would have to be a game. So that's a typical way of giving a definition, is to attempt to find necessary and sufficient conditions for something being a member of that set. Well, Wittgenstein thought that actually with game is indefinable. You could, what is there in common between football, cricket, table tennis, throwing a ball against the wall, solitaire, bridge, a game of make-believe, a ring of roses? There are all these different things that we call games, and he argued that if you look and see, don't just assume you know, you can't find a common essence, no essential feature that they all share, nothing that makes them all a game. So his claim was that we understand what a game is perfectly well, even though we can't identify this pure notion of gameness. It's not that they all have winners and losers, because throwing a ball against a wall there's no winner or loser. Then they're not all played on a board, they're not all physical activities, some are very cerebral. So every time you try and find some defining feature of a game, you're thwarted, Wittgenstein thought. So he argued that actually game is a family resemblance term. There are just these patterns of overlapping resemblances between the things we call games, but no common denominator, no single feature that picks out all the things that are games. And a lot of people influenced by him have thought, well, maybe art is like that as well. Maybe art is a family resemblance term. So actually, if it's a family resemblance term, that means there are paradigm examples of art, the Mona Lisa, say, and there are more peripheral examples which may or may not be works of art. And like, for instance, the Martin Creed work, or my work even. And as a culture, people make a decision about whether to extend the concept, to include this, because it's a bit like a sculpture, it has some properties that are a bit Duchampian. Duchamp's ready-mades have already been accepted as works of art. And we make these decisions pre-consciously. It's not like there's a committee that makes the decision, but practices emerge, and that's all that we have. And there's no single thing. When you ask the question, what is art, you're never going to find a little essence of art. That's a Wittgensteinian approach, which I used to find very convincing, but I've changed my mind about this slightly, because there is a brilliant little-known book by a philosopher called Bernard Suits, S-U-I-T-S, called The Grasshopper, which isn't about art, which is about games and why we might value them. And he gives a pretty plausible account of what a game is.